Hey guys, today we're doing another really scary case. If you would like to support my channel, be sure to subscribe and remain active. It actually does a lot of good. I'd be incredibly thankful for that. Let's begin. In the summer of 2024, a small coastal town on the east coast of the U.S. was brought into the public eye by a crime which would shock its residents for months. A young woman died in broad daylight, her last frantic calls in despair. Police initiated a manhunt for Ammon with a shadowed past. His name was quickly ringing throughout the country. As every new lead, the story became more and more nightmarish. What started out to be an ordinary criminal case broke down into a story of jealousy, savage conduct running, and secrets lying within the very walls of household that hid a horrifying truth. Maxwell Johnston had been familiar to police for many years prior to his name, became inextricably linked with tragedy. Brought up in a dysfunctional atmosphere, he became a participant early in street wars. As a teenager, he turned to the infamous Blood Street crew, feared throughout the U.S. for their brutality and strong involvement in the sale of illicit drugs. For Maxwell, the crew represented a source of acceptance and a fall from which there was no escape. At 20, Maxwell fought addiction and earned his living through the illegal distribution of illicit substances. His criminal record, stored in police records, was interspersed with incidents related to such activity. From 2009 to 2015, he was arrested 4 times, each term ending in his release, only to come back harder and bolder than before. His last conviction was for an 8-year term behind prison walls, the toughest of all. During imprisonment, Maxwell learned how to survive a vicious prison system, which only toughened his already combative nature. He was let out on parole in 2022, but nothing had changed. He violated the terms of his release the following year and ended up back in jail. When he was released again in 2023, he resumed his old group, completely reverted to being dangerous and unpredictable. His paranoia became worse. He perceived danger everywhere and took any resistance as a provocation. Women who came into contact with him faced a special danger. Ash's need for control tended to raise itself to physical aggression. Gabriella Carollo's path, but had been totally different. She was born and brought up in New Jersey, suffered domestic violence from an early age. Her father bullied the household, creating an atmosphere of fear. Her sister Anna was her only support. They both learned to withstand the father's outbursts, taking comfort in each other's company. That common experience of pain created an attraction so strong that it became their strongest friendship. As Gabriella matured, she would not allow her past to shatter her spirit. To her friends and family, she was a bright, witty young woman with a quick wit. She could fill a room with laughter, enjoyed teasing, and defended her friends. Her style was a combination of modern urban sensibilities and independence, piercings, tattoos, streetwear, and a musical preference that spanned rap and R&B to country. Most importantly, she loved Nike sneakers, particularly Air Jordans, which were her favorites. The most significant individual in Gabriella's life was her son Calvin, born in 2021. She was bringing him up alone, yet never felt alone. Her mother and sister stood with her all the time. Gabriella tried her best to coordinate her work and parenting so that Calvin could grow up with love and affection. In spite of all this, she continued to be the soul of the family, full of energy and vitality. These 2 lives were never destined to cross. Maxwell, whose existence was tainted by violence and crime, and Gabriella, who was fighting to create a peaceful, stable life for herself and her son, were from 2 entirely different worlds. Their encounter would be a tragic clash of order and disorder. He was after power and control. She craved love and peace. That difference would ultimately determine the horrific events to follow. Gabriella and Maxwell met in 2023, not long after Johnston had been released from custody. Their meeting wasn't a result of mutual acquaintances or a long-standing relationship. He came into her life unexpectedly, and things moved rapidly. Initially, it looked like a casual affair. Maxwell's charm, smooth talking, and aura of confidence created a false sense of infatuation. Gabriella, a person who tended to trust others and search for the good in people, consented to spend time with him, But the affair was short and volatile. Evidence of hostility and aggression surfaced within the first few weeks. Maxwell, accustomed to having the upper hand, insisted on control and took any dissent as a personal affront. He did not know how to release and could not abide someone else's decisions. To Gabriella, who cherished her independence, it was an agonizing ordeal. The relationship lasted briefly, but the tale did not. Johnston, after their breakup, refused to back down. He started pressuring her, calling, texting, and even displaying signs of snooping. Each try she made to distance herself was met by him as a challenge. His actions brought out the same paranoia that had once frightened even his own relatives. He perceived threats where there were none, accusing Gabriella of being responsible for the phobias that plagued him. What made matters more alarming was the fact that the hostility had started before the breakup had been conclusive. In their short time together, Maxwell had already raised a hand against her more than once. Gabriella knew how dangerous he was. She had witnessed his explosive anger in person. So when he made threats out of their breakup, his fear was real. By summer 2024, that fear was at its height. In June, days before the tragic incidents, Gabriella reported to her loved ones in plain terms that she was in fear for her life. Her family already understood about his criminal past, but even they could not have envisioned how severe things would get. To her sister and mother, there was one thing obvious. Gabriella was not the kind of person who would exaggerate. If she stated she was in danger, then something was indeed amiss. Her family begged her to be careful, but she couldn't quite manage to get away from his radar. Maxwell always managed to make himself noticed, doing just enough to make her fearful and to remind her Hestel had the upper hand. Gabriella informed her family that he wouldn't leave her alone, and that every time he arrived, it was like a threat. That summer morning in New Jersey began as any ordinary day. The sun was already high in the sky. The heat was felt early, and the streets were teeming with people about their usual business. For Gabriella Caro, it was nothing out of the ordinary. She was walking down the street heading for an intersection when a white Honda Pilot pulled up suddenly in front of her. The driver was Maxwell Johnston, her worst nightmare. He got out of the car and immediately went on the attack. There was no attempt to talk. His mode of action was solely intimidation and physical attack. Johnston assaulted her right on the street in broad daylight. Gabriella, perceiving the threat she was under, was able to retrieve her phone and called her mother first. The only words that were transmitted over their receiver were, "He attacked me. Call the police." Those were the last words her mother ever heard from her. Minutes later, her mother attempted to dial back, but all she heard was yelling. It was Johnston's yell, and the anger in it carried through clearly. Gabriella had no time to escape, and the assault turned into a deadly act. Her second call was to emergency services. The operator overheard that an instrument of violence had been utilized on her. Then there was the firing of a shot. Gabriella had been shot in the side, the bullet injuring her ribs and striking vital organs, such as her spine. Although the extremity of her injuries was incompatible with life, she was conscious and could talk. She bled on the sidewalk as a passerby came along to assist. In her last minutes, she informed him of the name of her assailant and a descriptive account of his car, color, and license plate number. First responders arrived swiftly and evaluated her status as critical. To conserve time, they chose to airlift her. Gabriella was taken by air to the nearest major medical complex where trauma units conducted routine procedures, cutting off the bleeding, attempting to get her breathing again, and putting her heart in a stable state. All that could be done under the given circumstances had been done. Still, in spite of everything, the wounds were too grievous. Later that same night, doctors broke the sorrowful news to her loved ones. Gabriella Caro had died. The official reason was a gunshot wound with extensive internal damage. Gabriella's death was the result of several converging factors. Johnston's relentless behavior, the limited time for law enforcement to intervene, and the inability to protect her when she needed it most. The date, June 27, 2024, remains seared into her family's memory as the day her fears were tragically confirmed. News of Gabriella Carollo's death devastated those who loved her. Her mother couldn't grasp the reality that the daughter she'd spoken to that every morning on the telephone would never come home again. Her sister Anna, who'd endured every hardship with Gabriella since childhood, was left without the closest person to her. But the most serious impact was caused to 3-year-old Calvin. He lost the woman who had been his main source of love and care. He was too young to comprehend the full significance of what had occurred. But adults around him knew all too well what her absence meant. His life would now move forward without the one person who mattered to him more than anyone else. While Gabriella's loved ones were preparing for her funeral, the case took an unexpected turn. Maxwell Johnston's parents voluntarily came forward to speak with the police. His mother had begun to suspect that her son was involved in the crime and explained that his behavior had recently become deeply concerning. According to her, Maxwell had developed an excessive delusion regarding Gabriella, alleging that she was stalking him and attempting to injure him. His family recognized such allegations were not accurate, but they were unable to overlook the condition of his mental health. When the incident occurred, his mother called him on the phone. The call seemed unsettling. He continued to insist he did not wish to return to prison, and his language was disjointed and nervous. Following the call, they lost communication with him. His father also asserted that Maxwell had been behaving insanely and uttered words that sounded like a last goodbye. Gabriella's funeral was the most agonizing experience for her family. It was a day that saw grief being coupled with an intense sense of powerlessness. Present at the ceremony were not just friends and members of her family, but also law enforcement officials. Their presence was aimed at providing security to the family because the culprit was still on the loose. At the service, something happened that intensified the emotional weight of the day. Anna, Gabriella's sister, received a message from Maxwell. In it, he mentioned that he knew the police were guarding the family. That meant he was nearby, or at the very least monitoring the situation. The fact that he reached out on the day of the funeral felt like yet another form of intimidation. The shock of receiving that message deepened the already overwhelming sorrow. The family wasn't just mourning. They were confronted with the fact that the man behind it all was still at large and still intruding into their lives. Upon Gabriella Carollo's death, authorities wasted no time tracking Maxwell Johnston. Gabriella herself had identified him before she became unconscious, leaving none in doubt as to his participation. But holding him back was not an easy job. Johnston was well aware of how to remain concealed, and his contacts in the criminal community aided him in evading the law. Police got their first major breakthrough when saw the white Honda Pilot in Newark. No signs of disturbance within which caused them to suspect that he'd voluntarily left it. This reinforced their assumption that Johnston was deliberately changing cars to mislead the police. Although he remained in Newark only briefly, officers discovered that he had a buddy there, a person he'd met while he was in custody. When the police went to see that person, they found that Johnston had indeed visited, but he'd already relocated on. A resident in Howell then provided a tip that he had seen a man described as Johnston in a local house. But by the time officers made it to the address, he had vanished once more. This was a pattern that would be repeated many times. Police would get tips, but Johnston kept one step ahead, always moving around and using individuals from his past. A better picture began to form. This was not a person acting on impulse. Heck knew what he was doing. He was hunted and carefully selected houses where he could temporarily hide. Most of them are owned by individuals he had encountered during his time in prison. Such connections were particularly reliable since people with similar criminal histories would have motives to shield each other and not interact with law authorities. Still, in spite of all his caution, Johnston erred. A tone of the residences he dropped a phone. Forensic experts examined Thydam and were able to extract data pointing to his intended next hideout. This is how they homed in on a region alongside Toms River, where a woman named Elizabeth Mascarelli, locally known as Liz Grimm, was thought to have been hiding him. The series of false leads and short-term hideouts ultimately resulted in a clear breakthrough. The authorities had pinpointed the specific location where Maxwell Johnston was in hiding. For law enforcement, this was a crucial turning point. They no longer had to chase vague leads. They now had a confirmed address where the suspect was holed up with a woman who had chosen to help him avoid justice. 29-year-old Elizabeth Mascarelli was fully aware that she was harboring a man suspected of a violent crime. She knowingly provided him with everything he needed to stay hidden. The two spent 4 days together in her room, rarely leaving. Throughout that time, Johnston remained armed and kept his firearm close at all times. Police encircled the house, but didn't storm in right away. They initially tried negotiating, but the two inside wouldn't budge. Johnston took up position near the window and periodically brandished his gun, building a tense standoff. Things heated up dramatically when he began firing at lawmen. In retaliation, officers fired back and released flashbang grenades in hopes of getting them to surrender. But instead of panicking or attempting to de-escalate, the couple responded inappropriately as if they were enjoying the mayhem. The standoff lasted for almost 7 hours. Johnston and Mascarelli did not only fire back, they appeared to be ignoring the hazard altogether. During the middle of the exchange of gunfire, they were said to be physically intimate with Mascarelli, videotaping some of the standoff on her phone. Photos and videos had started appearing on her Instagram page. One had them naked with Johnston making a gesture that simulated a shot to the head. Another had Mascarelli licking the gun barrel with a smirk on her face at the camera. These troubling posts became instantly viral before her account was removed. To the police, it was yet another indication they were working with individuals totally outside any moral limits. Neighbors near heard the sound of constant shooting and explosions from the flashbangs. 3 others surrendered aside from Johnston and Mascarelli. Daniel Bolstadand, 2 men, both named Jared, they came out of the house peacefully and were instantly apprehended. Simultaneously, the primary targets were still inside. Attempts to drive them out with gas were unsuccessful. Johnston continued shooting, at one point, hitting a police shield. Tensions continued high late in the night. It wasn't until the tactical team ratcheted up pressure that Mascarelli finally came out. She had an apparent injury on her head from one of the flashbangs and was immediately apprehended and taken to a medical center. Following her surrender, police inserted a drone into the home to evaluate the situation. The camera sees Johnston's body. He had taken his own life, repeating the gesture he had made in his previous photos. His death concluded the manhunt, but not the investigation. As soon as the standoff at Toms River concluded and Elizabeth Mascarelli was arrested, investigators were able to enter the house that had been the hideout for the criminals. They were greeted there by a horrific scene. The room was completely disheveled, stuff thrown everywhere, bloodstains that enveloped the floors and walls. A heavy, pervasive smell permeated the air, transforming the house into an ominous reminder of the brutality that had played itself out within. Police found a number of phones during the search. One of them that belonged to Elizabeth Mascarelli had photos that drastically changed the course of the investigation. On the phone were pictures of a dead man, subsequently identified as 56-year-old Carrie Rollison, the property owner. The photos revealed harrowing levels of brutality. In one, Johnston stood next to the body, gesturing as if shooting a gun into the head. In another, Mascarelli smiled as he held an axe in the victim's chest. These photographs were not taken for records. They seemed to be exhibits of cruelty and enjoyment. To investigators, it was obvious the murder of Rollison had been preceded by a deliberate act of desecration. Mascarelli and Johnston did not end only a life. They ridiculed it afterward. After the phone's contents were examined, forensic teams went back to investigate the crime scene further. All indications led to that very spot as the site where Carrie received fatal injuries. But the findings were just the start. Lying close to the house, there was a metal incinerator. Within it were the burnt remains of belongings, blood-stained clothing, and an axe with the victim's DNA. It was apparent that the suspects had tried to burn evidence, but did not succeed in getting rid of it altogether. More followed after interrogating one of the suspects arrested, Danielle Bolstad. She revealed the site of the remains during her interrogation. Police were guided to a wooded spot some 100 yards from the crime scene. There they discovered big black plastic bags with dismembered human remains cut into 8 pieces. They were accompanied by a shovel, a blanket, and a metal rod. These were suspected to have been employed in the process of body dismemberment and transportation. Medical examiners had it confirmed that Rollison had died from gunfire injuries, then blunt force trauma to the head. Only after that was the body mutilated. Experts pointed out that the mutilation wasn't random. It was done with intention and forethought. The photos seen on Mascarelli's phone supported this finding. The perpetrators didn't just admit what they had done, they seemed to want to document it. Unlike Gabriella Caro, Carrie Roll didn't have intimate loved ones who could vouch for him after the disaster. A lone man who by age 56 had outlived all immediate family and lacked any current contact with far-off relatives. He lived in virtual complete isolation. That's probably why the conditions under which he died went undetected for so long. The home that was to become the site of a tragic discovery had previously been occupied by Danielle Bolstad and Tuman, Jared Palumbo and Krasak. Later, Johnston and Mascarelli moved in. Authorities think the home served as a sort of shared lifestyle based on the use and storage of illegal drugs. While there is no direct evidence to connect Carrie Rollison himself with this practice, it seems his house had become a haven for those engaged during that lifestyle. Testimony by the inhabitants reveals show life within the house was. They described the atmosphere being one of fear. Maxwell Johnston always had a gun nearby and made no concealed intentions of using it. Witnesses remembered how he would sometimes point it at others in the house, then laugh as if everything was a sick game. Mascarelli copied his actions. The pictures retrieved from Mascarelli's phone assisted in describing the psychological pressure others in the house felt. Bolstad and Palumbo subsequently confessed they were scared not just for themselves, but also feared being next. All the residents had different roles. Danielle Bolstad, a 42-year-old female, got entangled in assisting to hide evidence following the offense. Jared Palumbo, 36, decided to cooperate with investigators and provided a full account of what transpired. The third resident, Jared Krasak, did the opposite, claiming no involvement, despite evidence pointing to him that he'd helped dismember the body and clean up the scene. Carrie himself was not seen as dangerous by neighbors. He was characterized as a reserved, introverted man who perhaps was too naive with strangers. It was this sama naivety that ushered danger into his house. Unlike the rest, he did not have any criminal record and did not demonstrate any signs of violence. The fear expressed by the others was no exaggeration. There was acclimate of ceaseless watching in the home. Johnston kept track of everyone's movements, verified who was entering and leaving, and utilized his weapon to threaten. For Bolstad and Palumbo, this engendered a disabling sense of control, and they later described it as being the primary reason they hadn't contacted authorities earlier. In the end, the residents' accounts unveiled another side to the tale. Behind the high-profile manhunt and dramatic standoff was a quieter, continuing nightmare. According to Jared Palumbo, he and Jared Krasak had been in the basement when Carrie Roll was murdered. They heard 3 shots, and then Johnston came in and instructed them to vacate the house immediately. On their way upstairs, they saw Rollison's body on the floor. Palumbo swore it was Mascarelli who'd pulled the trigger, although Johnston had been standing there. That little detail changed the course of the investigation and redefined the knowledge of every member's part in the group. One especially chilling detail highlighted by Jared Palumbo was what occurred right after the murder. Rather than cover up or talk about what to do with the corpse, the group headed to McDonald's. They got food and ate quietly as if nothing unusual had happened. This action underscored just how warped their perception of reality had become. A man had just died. Yet some of the group members behaved as if it were a normal day. The second stage came, the dismemberment of the body. According to Palumbo, neither he nor Danielle Bolstad were permitted to be involved in that process. He said flat out that it was Maxwell Johnston, Elizabeth Mascarelli, and Jared Krasak who split up the remains. That assertion was later corroborated by physical evidence, the equipment that was used, the pattern of blood marks, and the manner in which the body had been packaged. Palumbo averred that he only saw the aftermath, black plastic bags in preparation to be removed. Covering up the crime involved all the members of the house, but their participation differed. Danielle Bolstad and Palumbo were called in to assist in moving the remains. In their own testimony, Palumbo acknowledged moving the bags from the basement to the top floor as Bolstad filled them into her vehicle. She also took Johnston and Mascarelli to get rid of the bags in a forest. Palumbo no longer took part at this point. Palumbo's testimony proved instrumental to the investigation. It enabled authorities to shift away from the early assumption that Johnston was the lone culprit in the second murder. His testimony formed independent charges for everyone involved depending on their distinct roles. The subsequent trial was the outcome of months of investigation. The main defendant was Elizabeth Mascarelli. She pleaded guilty in court and professed remorse. She constantly admitted the gruesome nature of what she had done, but her defense attempted to portray her not merely as a perpetrator, but even as a victim of heavy psychological duress exerted by Johnston. Her lawyer contended that she had acted at the threat of an armed man, and Mascarelli herself asserted that she had lived in perpetual fear of her life and her son's safety. In spite of her cries of regret, the facts of the matter tipped heavily against her. She was given 25 years imprisonment with a minimum of 85% of the sentence to be served, in addition to a further 5 years supervised release. Jared Krycak's case was dealt with separately. Although he had originally admitted his part, he had tried to alter his statement in court, denying having participated in the dismemberment. But the court raised inconsistencies. In his arrest, he had given descriptions of the process, which involved the use of amytal bar to split joints. His argument of being an unwilling bystander was not found in the evidence. He was found guilty of evidence, tampering and abuse of a corpse, and sentenced to 8 years in prison. The Danielle Bolstad and Jared Palumbo cases were tried separately. A major factor in both was their early cooperation with police. Their testimony enabled law enforcement to reconstruct the order of events and determine who had assumed the charge of certain actions. The court did recognize that without their testimony, Elizabeth Mascarelli could have been given a lighter sentence, and Jared Krycak's involvement could have gone undetermined. Both were eventually sentenced without jail time. Palumbo, with no previous criminal history, was given 18 months of supervised probation and was also asked to undergo a rehabilitation program. Bolstad, with a past conviction, was given a harsher sentence. About 2 years of probation, as well as a demand to cooperate with probation officers throughout. Following Gabriella's death, effective care for 3-year-old Calvin devolved to her maternal family. Although official guardianship papers were not released, social media postings indicated that he was residing full-time with his grandmother and Aunt Anna. Their pages displayed photographs of strolls, family gatherings, and glimpses of everyday life. To make Calvin feel secure and safe, they created a daily routine, which involved quality time with loved ones and keeping things that made him think about his mother. The family made every effort to protect him from talks regarding the tragedy, and instead concentrated on daily chores that provided comfort and stability. Rather than concentrating on words, Gabriella's memory is sustained by meaningful gestures. A memorial plate was installed at the spot where her life was lost. Her family goes to visit the spot on a regular basis, taking flowers and things in purple, which is her favorite color. On special occasions, particularly Mother's Day, Anna and the grandmother take Calvin there. For the grown-ups, it's a means of celebrating Gabriella's life. For Calvin, it's a reassuring habit that indicates his mom is not forgotten and loved even though she is not here. Thank you for watching, everyone. Your support is greatly appreciated by me, and you can contribute to my channel's growth by hitting that like button, leaving a comment, and sharing this video. Your interaction truly makes a difference. See you soon.